sorry, jumped the gun there. Rita is also one of our wonderful Wattle Fellows who, if you've been coming, you will have met three of them already. So she's also been doing a project around sustainability on the side of her PhD, because she wasn't busy enough already. And that project explores place-based sustainability education among Ghanaian university students. So her project has empowered about 200 university students to lead sustainability transformations on the campuses, and we'll hear a bit more about that in a while. So alongside her PhD, Rita is a research assistant for multiple global sustainability education projects, including the Monitoring and Evaluation of Climate Change Education Project and the International Literacy Project. So you're very welcome. The next person I'd like to introduce you to is Professor Harry Quiney, who I think is known to many of you. So welcome, Harry. Harry completed MSc in Mathematics and Chemistry at Monash University and DPhil at Oxford University in relativistic atomic physics. He was a research fellow of the Royal Commission Exhibition of 1851, an EDSLC Advanced Fellow in the Clarendon Lab, and a lecturer at Wattle College, Oxford. He is currently a Professor of Physics at the University of Melbourne and Head of the School of Physics, which is his role on the panel this evening. He has been the Deputy Director of the Bachelor of Science program at Melbourne, and he's active in the university's research and education programs, which hopefully we'll hear a bit about on the topic of sustainability. His research interests include relativistic electronic physics, the development of X-ray and electronic imaging methods, and their applications to condensed matter physics and medical diagnostics. So, very wide array of research activities, Harry. All right. Next in my lineup is amazing, old friend of mine actually, Amanda McKenzie. Please come on up. Amanda might look familiar to some of you from TV or elsewhere. Amanda is the CEO of the Climate Council, and she's a really prominent Australian environmental leader and one of the best-known public commentators on the climate crisis in Australia. So we're very lucky that she's found the time to join us this evening. Back in 2013, she worked with Professor Tim Flannery at the Climate Commission, and with support from some of Australia's leading scientists, she co-founded the 100% independent and people-backed Climate Council. It was actually Australia's largest crowdfunding campaign at the time, and Amanda has led the organisation as a CEO for now 11 years. She also founded the Australian Youth Climate Coalition and has served on expert panels in renewable energy for the Queensland and Northern Territory governments. She was the founding chair for the Centre for Australian Progress and is a former board director at Plan International Australia and the Whitlam Institute. She holds an honours degree in law from Monash University and an arts degree from Melbourne University. Amanda has also won numerous awards, including being recognised as one of Westpac's 100 Women of Influence and a finalist in the Telstra Young Businesswoman of the Year Awards. So you are very welcome and thank you for joining us. And last but by no means least, if I can find the right page. Here we go. Dr. Kestin, come on up. Thank you. So, Dr. Kestin is a senior program manager in the strategy and engagement team of the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, or MSDI, at Monash University. She co-leads MSDI's Sustainable Development Goals leadership domain and is the network manager for the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, regional network for Australia, New Zealand and Pacific, which is hosted by MSDI, and hopefully she'll explain to us what that means during the course of the evening. Tal, I've enjoyed a couple of conversations with Tal in the lead up to this, so it's really clear actually that she's just passionate about the role universities and academia can and must play in helping achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And a key focus of Tal's role is to help mobilise the higher education sector on the Sustainable Development Goals, so we couldn't have a better fit for the panel tonight. She led the writing of the globally renowned 2017 guide, Getting Started with the SDGs in Universities, and the 2020 SDSN guide called Accelerating Education for the SDGs in Universities. Prior to the current role, she's managed a range of interdisciplinary initiatives at MSDI, from Climate Scientists Australia, the Australian Bushfire Arson Prevention Initiative, Indigenous Communities and Climate Change Program. And she's also coordinated delegations to the UN. So she has a BSc Honours in Applied Mathematics and Zoology, which is a great combination.
the Sustainable Development Goals are. They are kind of a framework for us to think about sustainability. They're one of probably many frameworks, but I'm very passionate about them. I could talk about them all day, but I won't. So basically, they were created by the UN in 2015, and the idea was to try and develop a set of goals to focus the world on really addressing massive challenges that we're facing as a society, both around the environment as well as around social and peace. How do we bring the world together to really focus on addressing these challenges? So after what has to be a very long UN negotiation process, they came up with 17 of these goals, addressing a very wide range of topics, and under them there's 169 targets. So it's actually a very massive agenda of things that we need to address as a society to have a good and prosperous life and a planet that is healthy. They have a whole lot of principles under them that I find really quite inspiring, particularly around the fact that everyone needs to be involved in this. It's not just a problem for some countries or some areas. It's actually even countries that are very well off, like Australia, and I think we'll talk about this a bit later, are nowhere near achieving all of these goals. So actually we all have a role to play. Another one that I'm very passionate about is leave no one behind. So we all know that on average things might look good, but when you actually dig down and disaggregate data, you actually find that averages are hiding a lot of disadvantage and social exclusion. And so we can't just look at how we're performing on average. We really need to think about who is being left behind and making sure that we help bring them up to speed. Another one that I'm even more passionate about is that the whole agenda, although there's 17 goals, they're actually all connected. They all depend on each other, and we can't just address one area and ignore all the others. And I feel like that's going to be one of the big things that we'll end up talking about today. And it's basically saying that you can't, for example, have a healthy, people can't be healthy unless you think about the environment and that they're living in. So there's a very strong link, for example, between climate change and human health in many different ways. So if you are wanting people to be healthy, you have to think about the bigger environment. And it actually also goes the other way around, in that if you don't think about, if you want to address the environment, but you don't think about how people interact with the environment and what they get from the environment, they sometimes can say, no, we don't want to do things. But actually, they're all very closely interlinked. So I guess the framework is just a framework. It's voluntary. Countries don't have to address it. But it's been very inspirational to bring different sectors together to kind of have a shared language and a shared goals that they're working towards. And a lot of sectors, including in Australia, not so much the government, but certainly business and academia, have really strongly adopted the goals and thought about how they can contribute to them. The thing is, though, with the state of the world today and in the last few years, progress on the SDGs has actually gone backwards in the last
particular out of the Sustainable Development Goals. Feel free to comment on the other ones if you wish to.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? Is that coming through?
If you slide it until the light goes green instead of yellow.
Oh, yeah, got it. Thank you. So how is Australia tracking? At the moment, the last few years, our climate pollution, our emissions has been flatlining, essentially. So it's not going up, but it's not going down either. And what we need is for our emissions to plummet very rapidly this decade. The analysis that we've done with our scientists, including scientists that are involved in the IPCC and others, is that Australia's role requires us to slash our pollution from 75% this decade and to net zero by 2035. So that's a significant challenge, and we need to accelerate the work that has already been done. But if you unpack it a little bit more from the top line of our emissions across the whole of the nation, there is some really bright spots, and the first is the electricity sector. There has been substantial change. We now have 40% of our energy coming from renewable sources, which is not widely known. 3.5 million homes have solar panels on the roof. When I started working on climate change 17 years ago, there was about 6,000 homes with solar panels. So there's been a huge change in Australia that's been driven by individuals at a household level, it's been driven by businesses, it's also been driven by policy, particularly at a local and state government level, whereas federally we've seen a lack of action for a decade, but now there has been some important policy change over the last 2 years, and the safeguard mechanism is one of those. It's a very boring name for policy, but essentially it's about regulating the 215 biggest polluters in Australia. So we won't see the impact of that policy fully flow through for some time in terms of our emissions. Same with things like the National Vehicle Efficiency Standards, which have come through as well. So that will start impacting vehicles in January. So there has been a whole range of different policies that have come through in the last 2 years, which are really important, but will take some time to flow through in terms of our overall emissions. That said,
Can I just ask you how Australia's policies on things like that compare to other countries in Europe?
Australia is at the back of the pack still.
Okay.
We essentially did nothing for 10 years and made the problem worse. So it will take a lot of time for Australia to get into the middle of the pack, let alone be a leader. But if any country was going to do it, it would be us. We've got so much land, so much potential for solar, wind, a whole range of different renewable energy sources. We have one of the largest reserves of lithium in the world for batteries, same with other critical minerals that are important for the clean energy revolution. So the analysis that we've done at the Climate Council is that you could reduce our pollution 75% this decade with just existing technology now. For industry, for instance, there hasn't been substantial change there. You could electrify a whole range of different processes in the industry that don't require high heat levels, and that would make a really big difference. There's lots of opportunity across Australia to slash our pollution far more. So the government's committed to reduce our pollution 43%. Their analysis says they're on track to get to 42% reduction. We say, you've done that in the first 2 years of your government, what can you do if you get another term? It's got to be far more than what currently is promised.
I feel like there's some nuggets of hope in there.
That's what I want to say, is that I feel like we're in the messy years.
Yeah.
We could definitely go backwards on the clean energy revolution at this point, but there's huge momentum now in terms of, like, when I started working on climate change, it was essentially just a moral case, whereas now it's clearly an economic case as well. That said, we now see the climate crisis all around us, and there's a huge inertia in the system. So we will continue to see worsening climate disasters. How can we build the resilience of our communities now that we know that that's in the pipeline, and do as much as we can to prevent things getting worse?
I couldn't say anything, but thank you. Great. Okay, so just moving on from climate for a second. So we know, and our first lecture actually was about the oceans, the physics of oceans, and how they affect climate. Last week's lecture was actually about geothermal energy in the Latrobe Valley and Australia's incredible potential for geothermal, which I had no idea about until this year, so I've learned something through this series. But I'd like to ask Harry actually, so obviously climate depends a lot on physics, that much is clear.
understand it in very great detail. We are constantly challenging and testing our understanding of all the principles that go up to make the oceans, the atmosphere, our consumption of energy, our desire for energy, our development of technologies, and so on. And as Amanda said, I mean, there have been tremendous advances in technology, and the technologies which exist already, if they were implemented, could go a very long way to addressing the problems that we have. I don't think that it's a lack of physics that's the problem here. I don't think that it's a lack of technology that's the problem here. It's a failure to communicate. And as sort of practice for this presentation, I tried out, I had a discussion, I had a meeting with various leaders in the university, heads of various schools, the head of music, the head of the conservatory, the head of English and various others. And I said, well, if I had to put my finger on one problem in the university that we don't address, it's really the siloing between sciences on the one hand and the arts on the other, right? The physics, chemistry, maths, biology are seen as generators of technology, understanding of physical processes, but they're seen as being disconnected from the more creative aspects of human endeavour on the other. And to some extent, physics has a bit of an image problem in the sense that we do all of these things. People on the other side of the university see it as being a little brutal sometimes for its own sake. We produce the technologies which have created the problems, and then other people come along and fix the problems that we've created. And what we don't do at the university is to co-create the technology with a discussion about how it will be used. What are the problems, and we rush headlong into generating technologies on the assumption that they will be fabulous. From the steam engine to the transistor, and from the transistor to the internet, and we think, it will be marvelous. But we never ever discuss at that point why it might not be marvelous. And so, I had quite a wide-ranging discussion with a lot of people in the university that this is what we don't do. We don't involve all of human thought in this discussion from the get-go. I mean, we do one thing, and then it all goes wrong, and then we do the other thing. What we should be doing, actually, is discussing how we're going to implement these technologies, what the political, economic, social implications are altogether, rather than, my department producing quantum technologies for quantum computers, and then 10 years down the line discovering that we've completely undermined democracy or destroyed the economic system or broken the banking system, and then going, oh, I didn't think of that. Right? I mean, a lot of these things are actually quite predictable.
How do you follow that with broken democracy? Actually, it's a really good point. I actually hosted a quantum computing event a couple of months ago, which was one of the science faculty level dean's lectures and panel. We had a wonderful panel, and in preparing for that panel, I actually asked each of the participants whether they work with people who work in areas like philosophy and ethics. And I was actually a little bit disconcerted that the answer was no. And it was interesting because what came out of the discussion and the involvement of the audience in the questions there was a clear concern that they wanted the people leading that to be asking those questions at this early stage of technology development. And so I think you've hit on something quite fundamental there, Harry, which is that engagement with end users and that engagement with people who have different life experience from the people who are developing the technology and different areas of expertise is something that I'm not going to say just this university. You use the phrase this university. I think universities as a whole generally are fairly bad at doing that, and it's something. So we'll come back to that in a bit. Sorry, did you want to respond?
Well, I was just going to say it's a long-standing tradition in physics to abrogate all responsibility. Right? this because it's fun. I love quantum physics. I don't know, whatever your particular quirk of physics is, that's reason enough to do it. I think in the very, sadly, many years that I've been a physicist, I can't remember more than once or twice where people have stopped to ask, well, should we? What are the consequences of it? Where is this all heading? You never hear that discussion, and I think the surprise that you said about that the audience is important, but the people practicing it less so. I think.
Well, they weren't implementing it into the way that they're doing their research at that early stage.
Yeah, I think this is something that's worth discussing.
Yeah. Okay. I'm coming back a little bit to that point later. So, but given what you said, let's sort of move on to the topic of universities and the expert here around education and universities and sustainable development goals is Rita. So, just to give us the lay of the land, I have asked Rita to actually give us a short presentation about her work in education and sustainability. You can go on further. There you go. So, Rita, over to you about the role of education and sustainability in your Wattle project. Thanks.
Thank you.
If you just slide that one up. Yep. There you go. You're on.
Yes. So I will tag onto the SDGs that Kahl has talked about, and then just get right into SDG 4, which talks about quality education as part of the UN Agenda 2030. So the agenda mentions higher education institutions, both as a target and means of implementation for driving sustainability. And because of that, higher education institutions have been involved in integrating sustainability across all higher education activity, including education, research, campus operations and facilities, community outreach, and governance issues. So that means that aside the traditional role of teaching and learning that higher education institutions play, they are also expected to lead the transition by embodying the principles of sustainability, right, and demonstrating it to society to improve acceptability. And so many universities in Australia, per se, have made some efforts in integrating sustainability. When I got to Australia, I realized I was quite well, so I'm from Ghana, and I came here to do a PhD in sustainability and higher education. And when I got here, I realized that quite a lot of things were happening in Australian universities than where I came from, which is why I actually came here to study, to find solutions to help integrating sustainability in universities. But then I came, and then there was another study conducted by the MSDI project, which says that actually there's more sustainability curriculum in schools in the global south than in Western countries. And here I am coming to find solutions to advance sustainability in higher education. So that means that, okay, so there is enough sustainability in the curriculum, but that really did not translate to any tangible transformations in the behaviors of students. And so, which brings us to the topic of education of sustainability or education for sustainability. Education of sustainability in the sense that are we just integrating sustainability for students to learn about it and know what the causes is, what the effects are and all of that. And then education for sustainability is actually learning for transformations. Right. So so while my PhD takes more of a top-down approach, because I focus on the extent to which universities have integrated sustainability within their policies. The Wattle Fellowship program also allowed me to explore a more bottom-up approach where I try to look at the extent to which these education efforts are translating into intangible effects. And so to advance the bottom-up approach and to ensure that sustainability is sustainability, we designed this program where we integrated indigenous perspectives and place-based perspectives so that we kind of localize sustainability education, and then students can now take action, and then because then it's actionable and it has been contextualized so that they can take action on that. And so this was implemented in the form of a sustainability week where students went through the eco-city model, and then we had some workshops, we did clothes swapping, and we also embarked on some nature work, and in the end, because we had exposed them to the eco-city model, which lets them know how the ideal sustainable community should look like, we asked them to come into groups to also see how to use the university as a model of society and see how they could help advance sustainability through the university activities. And so interestingly, when we involved them, this involved students from so many disciplines, right? Students from physics, engineering, and even education and sustainability. And these were the 3 projects that were 10 groups, but we decided to select 3 and award so that we could implement on the campus. And one of them was a recycling project where they wanted to collect their plastics and then recycle them into waste bins, and then lava benches for their campuses. The second one was also more of an e-commerce project where they wanted to gather goods that are nearing expiry and put them on the platform to make it cheaper for students just to avoid food waste. And then there was also another group that wanted to do campus greening projects. And interestingly, we have talked about top-down and bottom-up approaches, but when I tried the bottom-up approach, I realized that helps to influence even the top level universities, because they realized that the students were actually interested in doing some of these things, and so the vice chancellor actually got interested and wanted to make it mainstream that into the university, right? Which really demonstrates how these 2 dimensions can affect one another. Yeah, and so some of my learnings from this is that sustainability education should actually be context-based, one that can lead to transformation and not just the education of it. Yeah, and so I also believe that when we expose students to or demonstrate what sustainability actually is and get them involved, then they will be renewed by their minds, and also because they have been engaged in that and they have also led projects in that, it is easy for it to become part of them, and then they are also able to apply that in their various professions. Yeah, so that was what the project was about. And with this project, we had so many students, about 200 students involved, and they are now carrying out their individual group projects on their campuses.
Amazing. That was work. And I was particularly impressed when I met Rita and we had a chat. And actually, I first learned about her work when we were on radio together, so it's kind of a live learning experience. And I think what was really powerful about it was seeing, for me, how much positive action can be taken with that sort of ground-up approach, and as you just highlighted, the influence that can have on the higher levels of the university. So, in your opinion, Rita, it seems so from your experience in Ghana with those ground-up projects, but do you think in Australian universities, this is something that students are interested in, that they want to take action on, that they would participate in projects like this if they were running here?
Yes, so one of the things that I'm really thankful for being a student at the University of Melbourne is that when I came to do a PhD, which is, the traditional PhD is research, right? It's philosophy. And so you just do your research, right, and then all of that. But thankfully for programs like the Wattle Fellowship, I also know that there's also the Climate Futures, which also offers programs for students to lead some sustainability actions. I have been able to practically implement what I would have done just in the books, right? Yeah, and so I know that there are so many other things that are going on in other universities, but particularly for the University of Melbourne, get involved with campus sustainability projects, which I volunteered for one of those projects as a project assistant for a group that is trying to take some actions here and there on the campus. Right? So I think when it comes to that, they are doing quite well as co-curricular. But when it comes to integrating it or mainstreaming it into the actual curriculum, I think that is where more work needs to be done. But I also know that the sustainability team has initiated some projects that are geared towards that. I heard about the asset project where students will be able to calculate their own contributions, or more like a footprint calculator, where they will be able to know what actions we need to deteriorate the sustainability situation, or what actions will be good, and then that can guide the way that they take their decisions with regards to their daily lives and their behaviors. So I think gradually we will get there in mainstreaming some of these things into the curriculum, because as you said, not everybody can have the opportunity to be selected for some of these projects, right? So if we do integrate them into the curriculum, I think that would really be good.
And just quickly, when you went through your education pre-PhD, how much sustainability education did you receive?
Honestly, I received quite a good amount of sustainability education, but then again, it was education of sustainability. I mean, I wasn't transformed in any way until I went to, I tell the story about how I was working in one of Ghana's universities as a quality assurance and academic planning officer, and then at the time I was also doing my master's in environmental planning, which meant that I had to find a research project, and so I was just trying to find a balance between that role and my master's program, and then it landed me into, okay, how can I try to do something for the university that I'm working in that also fits environmental sustainability, right? So I just chanced on it by accident. It wasn't something that I would say that I was doing because I was concerned, right? Yeah, but as I delved into the ecological footprints toolkit, I actually almost got obsessed with it. I was like, oh, okay, so we can actually transform our lives. There are things that I can do to take action about this. And then that led me to my PhD, because I found that the sustainability in the curriculum really wasn't leading to any transformation. So while it's good to integrate it in the curriculum, it's also important to ensure that the integration is not just off, but also for includes action things that can transform students' lives. For example, there's this program this subject that I'll be teaching this semester, and as part of the program design, it allows students, so it's called Urban Sustainability and Climate Change. It allows students to go on field trips, right, to see actual projects that are going on, and we have also integrated the ecological footprint tool to help students in how they can also, reshape their lives to kind of personalize sustainability, because somehow when you personalize it, then it's not just about ticking the boxes, right? Because it's something that you care about, so it's easier to translate that even in your profession into physics, just as you have already discussed. When you're thinking through this project, it just come because you are concerned about it.
Yeah, I think you're bottom up, top down, and then that personal approach, right? Like that, in order to make a behaviour change, somehow we have to be intrinsically motivated to do that, right? And so somehow integrating that together seems to be one of the big lessons from your research and your experience. I'd like to throw that to Kahl, actually, because you've written this amazing report, which I had a read of, which is it's great. I can put it on the website after about universities and the SDGs, and you touch on some of these things around your education, but also policy, the way the universities are running, and then the ways that universities
question, and universities are institutions and they have policies and they have a lot of control on what happens in a university. But one of the things that I remember someone telling me that really struck me was that academics are often much more loyal to their disciplines and the culture of the discipline and the broader international community than they are necessarily to the institution. And so this is why it's both important for the top-down policies and leadership in the university to help set a direction, but also why people themselves can have room to shape the way they contribute to understanding and Oh, sorry.
You've just got a little closer.
All right, apologies. So I think there's a very strong role for both top-down leadership in the university as well as bottom-up and how we all influence what we work on. In terms of the top-down, there is certain things that really can facilitate the kind of work that Harry
just a 12-year-old. So that's how we need to take this information and make it relevant to the community. And you think about, I live in Melbourne and I don't know who is doing well in football at the moment. I cannot care less, I don't read about it. I can find a way to just ignore the football in the same way that many people can ignore climate change when they're reading what they're interested in. Maybe they're reading about the football and not about climate change. So how do you make the issue relevant to the audience is what we consider our job in how we translate it. We also spend a lot of time working with scientists and other experts to help them become translators as well. For those that are researchers and often go very deep, when you communicate to a general audience, they don't want to hear all that depth. They just want to hear what is relevant for me, what is the top line. So helping climate scientists in particular have a real problem often with adding a range of different caveats before they add what is actually happening in the world. We call that burying the lead from a media perspective. So scientists need to really do that work to think about what is most interesting. I think one of the tragedies of universities is you can spend years and years and years on really important research, but then the communications piece is left to someone else and there's not a huge amount of time put into it. And then it goes out in the world to be translated to the rest of the audience, and no one ever hears actually what's gone on and why it's really relevant to them. So what I always argue for academics is put the amount of work that you put into the research, think about how much work you put into the communications to make sure people hear about all of the insights that you've created. For our reports, if we have a scientific report that's 70 pages, our communications people will spend maybe a few days reviewing that report and doing detailed communications work. But the key findings at the front of the report, that one page that summarises what it's all about, I tell our comms people, get deep, spend a lot of time going back and forth with the authors about what is the crux of what we're trying to tell. And I think that that's absolutely crucial.
I think what's really interesting is we started out when Harry was speaking, thinking about the ways in which researchers could benefit from engaging with the public and with the communities and with other sector knowledge holders in order to consider the implications of their research. And then you've also just encouraged us to say, well, we should also be doing a lot more work engaging with the public in terms of the way we communicate the results of our research. So at both ends of the piece, and probably during, I would argue as well.
That's right. And the world at the moment is on this, we're so challenged by what is truth in the world now. Scientists remain one of the most trusted voices on climate, as well as one of the most trusted voices across the board. Scientists have a critical role at this juncture in human history to communicate the big issues in a trusted way to the community, in which the community is searching for answers in a very uncertain and insecure world. You just see the potency of the Trump narrative, where there is a whole range of different lies, etc., that is communicating to people who feel very insecure in their position in the United States. And we're not in exactly that scenario in Australia, but of course AI is going to be utilised in a way to obscure the truth and disseminate lots of misleading content. So there is a role for those who think truth is important. It's kind of a weird thing to say. Who think that facts are critical and that the currency of democracy is accurate information. Scientists have a really important role, and there's an obligation to communicate well in that context.
So, on that note, Harry, our university is a bit out of touch, you think? And what can and should we change about that? And I'm going to throw in here as well, we just had a pre-asked question from the audience as well about what we are doing for, especially our education around things like sustainability. So are we missing the mark? Or in your opinion, are we evolving with the times? Are we meeting this need, or are we too slow?
Well, I talk for this university. In a former life before I was the head, I was the deputy director of the Bachelor of Science degree. The Bachelor of Science degree takes in 3,000 students a year, and it was seen as an opportunity to integrate the sustainability goals and a knowledge of climate change into the undergraduate program. So the Faculty of Science and the then director of the Bachelor of Science enthusiastically engaged, right, in this as part of their undergraduate program. Now, it turns out that this was not as successful as we thought it would be, mainly for the reasons that Kahl said, that it's not just academics whose main loyalty is to their discipline rather than their university or their degree. It turns out that this is also true of students, even first-year students coming into a degree. So the feedback that we've got for this subject over the past 3 or 4 years has been, yeah, it's interesting, but I would really prefer to study engineering. I would really prefer to study maths. I would really prefer to study this, that, and the other. So there's 3,000 students coming each year, and a couple of hundred are positive about it, but the other students are less so. Are we doing enough? Well, we certainly tried, but I don't think that we took into account the tribalism, both of the educators and the people wishing to be educated. And I don't think that we fully comprehended the complexity of changing people's minds about how complex the problem is, that a technology won't solve the problem, but rather a far more wide-ranging embrace of people's points of view about discussions, the truth and adherence to the truth, a view of the world based on evidence and reality, rather than what you would choose to believe, and political rhetoric, which occurs also in this country. I mean, major political parties in this country, many of them are climate deniers. They are people that believe that scientists, they have an agenda. They're doing this to get more research money to, do their fritter away in research projects that are of no consequence because I met a man in the pub who said that this is not a real problem, and that it will just go away, and that people just choose to believe it.
It sounds like Amanda wants to jump in. No, okay.
I'm just getting PTSD from so many conversations in the pub.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, or the coffee shop, doesn't it? But it's not entirely us failing students, though that is part of it. There is a lack of open discussion about the systems nature of it, the complex nature of it, the entanglement between physics on the one hand and economics on the other, and equity on the other, and habit on the other, a resistance, infuriating resistance of people to change.
Okay, I'm going to go a really quick fire round down for panelists and then take a few questions from the audience because I'm just conscious of time. My quick fire round question is if there's one thing that you could change that our audience, for example, or we on the stage can do something about, that would shift this discussion in the right direction, whether that's seeing university as a force for good,
the space, you can't argue with physics.
Well done.
We agree fully in this department. And Rita.
Yeah, I think I would now talk about systemic change and say that systemic change doesn't have to come from the government. We can all influence the system. I'm saying, giving this example of this person I met at, we were applying for project assistant positions, and this person had completed school and hadn't had a job and was there. So I asked her, why are you here? This is for students, so when you have completed your master's, so why are you here taking this volunteering job? And she's like, well, most of the jobs that I have applied for have asked for this kind of skill, right? And so that has pushed her to now take that, right? And that doesn't have to come from the government. It's just people who are hiring people who have quite certain positions to be able to influence change, who are able to drive some of these things. Yeah, so maybe when we're all able to do that part, then students can be interested in doing some of these things and not push it under the carpet.
Thank you. All right. We only have time for a couple of really good questions because one of our panelists in particular needs to get to the airport. So, Violet has, do you have a, you take this one? I'll take this one. If I can get it to turn on. And there were some keen hands that went up there. Violet, I'll let you choose the first one. Thanks.
Thank you for the panel. My name is Ian Penrose.
Oh, Ian, sure. Nice to meet you. I tried to address your question during the panel. So, is there another one? Or
No. Can I ask it more directly?
feel free.
Thank you, Suzie. My question is to the whole panel. Many scientists acknowledge that humanity's impact on the planet is unsustainable. Our population and consumption will exceed Earth's resources and life-sustaining systems. Reference to the work of global footprint and planetary boundaries. And Australia is one of the worst culprits. Our government's State of Environment report finds that the main drivers of our declining environment are population and economic growth. The challenge is partly political and economic, but it is science that is at the forefront. My question: do our university science educators address this fundamental sustainability issue in their classes? If not, why not?
I think I'm going to direct that at Harry. So, I think in our context of the science discovery subject, actually, whether it addresses these points around.
It does directly, yes.
Okay.
The question is a little double-edged in the sense that at the forefront of all of this is science, but not necessarily the cause of it. Science could address the problems, but the decline of the environment is not necessarily a consequence of science, but it is largely driven, I think, by societal demands, by politics, by economics, by other issues.
Yeah, which was there as well, right? I'm going to run to another question, so time to take one. There will be time to ask the panelists some more questions after we close the formal session as well.
Thank you. Just a question for Harry, since you might be able to clear up my problem here. Now, as an amateur, as a kid, I used to go for all the books on physics and earth science and astronomy and all that, and that did come up with the question of anthropogenic global warming quite often, when today, it's quite common. It's back then it wasn't as well known, but it was known by the scientific set. Now, the case was, the general opinion was, that if global temperatures increase by up to 5 or 6 degrees, that would also increase the human carrying capacity of the Earth. Is that true or false, Harry?
Could you repeat the human what? Capacity?
Generally opinion, back in the 70s and 60s and that, if Earth's temperature increased by 5 or 6 degrees, along with it, the human carrying capacity of the Earth would increase. Simple physics. You increase energy, and there's more people. Is that true or false?
I think you're probably better.
I can answer that if you like. There's now enormous amounts of research about what it would mean for humanity to go to those levels of warming, and it's the opposite. It would be billions of people encountering huge amounts of suffering, lots of water, food shortages, and the carrying capacity of the Earth. I forget the number of billions, but it's at least half of what we are looking at now. So it's more around 4 billion people or something like that. I can't remember the exact number, but it's a lot less than what we have now. So that's my motivation of working on climate, is I can see the immense human suffering that will come as a consequence of the extreme weather events being amplified around the world, the food and water crises that will hurt the poorest people first and the worst.
And I would add to that, it's about the complexity of this question. You can't equate the amount of energy in the system with its ability to sustain human life, because it's a complex system. I mean, if you were to raise your body temperature by 2 degrees, this would not be a good thing, even though your body suddenly has more energy in it, because other things happen. Your proteins would fold, your systems would decay, the complexity of the biological system that sustains your life would cease to exist if you raised it by 4 degrees.
Thank you. Most people are in favour of sustainability as long as they're not negatively influenced by it or they don't have any sacrifice themselves. I'll give a couple of quick examples. The first was, studies have shown on a life cycle analysis basis, having a pet dog creates as much greenhouse gas emissions as a medium-sized car. Yet hardly anyone would be willing to give up their pet dog. Second example, sustainability, pursuing sustainability means reduced economic growth. For example, productivity could have been falling, and people are not willing to accept it. Hence the rise of populism and the rest. Now, how can universities change this hardwired